Hi, Glenda back from Top Notch Legal, and I'm continuing with some practical tips when you're negotiating, and today's topic is Memorandums of Understanding. Now, last time I gave the example of a client of mine who'd been negotiating a complex deal over many months, and it was with a developer landlord who had expended quite a lot of money in the negotiations, had lost a considerable amount of time, had spent money on having plan revisions and revisions of the formal contract. When the parties were about to sign the formal contract, my client suddenly pulled out of the deal. Now, my client could do this because we had a Memorandum of Understanding. But I want to explain today that there's no magic in calling a document a Memorandum of Understanding or a Heads of Agreement, because it's the content of the document and the circumstances that determine whether or not it's enforceable. So I want to give you just a few little examples. So take an estate agent. They typically send out a document called Heads of Agreement when there's to be a new lease. And it will set out the basic terms like who are the parties, what's the address of the property, how much is the rent, what's the term of the lease, and maybe a couple of other items like what's the landlord to provide. This is intended to be binding once the tenant signs that Heads of Agreement, even though all the minor provisions are not in the document. On the other hand, you may find in the construction development industry or in the IT industry, Memorandums of Understanding or Heads of Agreement are typically not enforceable. Now, a Memorandum of Understanding is commonly used in negotiations which are long and complex, and its purpose is to define the issues that have been agreed upon so far. And if you're one of these parties, you may want to preserve your position. So, for example, there may be 20 issues that need to get resolved, and you've resolved 8 of them, so now you've decided to prepare a Memorandum of Understanding. But in your mind, if we get to issue number 15 and it's decided this way, I'm going to go back to issue number 8 that we agreed upon, and because I want to change it. So you want to preserve that position. And how do you do that? Because you've got to be careful. Once a Memorandum of Understanding is signed, even if it says you don't intend to be bound at this point, as negotiations progress and one issue after another gets resolved, you can reach a point where a court would say you have a binding agreement. So how do you stop this? How do you preserve your position? First of all, don't rely on having nothing in writing. Most commercial contracts do not need to be in writing to be enforceable. Secondly, I recommend that you have a Memorandum of Understanding that says you won't be bound until a formal agreement is signed. And, this is the clincher, make sure in every email that goes back and forth that you have a short statement saying we will not be bound until a formal agreement is signed. That's it today, Glenda from Top Notch Legal.